That helps. You got them?
You pass me all those cards there.
Yeah.
Okay.
This one here doesn't know she's on camera.
Okay, now. I'm gonna go one over here.
Maria? I thought Maria was watching the movie.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Just for a few more seconds. We want gray. I don't know.
Whoa.
Talking about. Oh, a two? Yeah. Oh. Watching it's fuzzy, I can't tell which player is which. Did we miss something magnificent?
Okay, Erin is sending you something?
Can I-
She's just telling me where. Do you have them in trouble?
No, can I borrow your little,
Jobber?
Yeah.
Just gonna put it-
sending you new pictures or something?
No, I had it up on live stream, but it's too fuzzy, I can't tell who's who.
Yeah,
It's really hard to look at.
that's true, but it must be, it's on the hammer stuff?
No, it's on the Amherst,
Facebook, Amherst,
basketball,
Spring Hill?
no, minor basketball association.
All right, good evening, everyone. We're gonna start the meeting off. Thank you for attending our second virtual Wild Blueberry meeting. A few reminders before we get started. Please stay muted to avoid background noise. If you have a question or comment, you can use the chat box or you can unmute yourself and ask the question. Please try to make sure your name on Zoom is your first and last name so that we can do proper pesticide receipts. You will need to be present for the whole session to receive your points. Your receipts will be emailed out to you by the end of the month. We're going to email all three together in one email after the last session next week. The barcode for certified crop advisor credits will be available at the end of the session, and these sessions will be recorded, and we'll be sending a YouTube link out for your reference. So we're going to kick things off with Amanda Walsh. Amanda is from Adama, and she's going to be talking on their key products. So welcome, Amanda.
Thank you, Megan. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. Megan, are you guys going to be showing the presentations?
Yeah, I can if you want, whatever's easiest.
Oh, well, I can share a screen. That's fine.
Okay.
I think you guys have backup, whatever's
Yes.
easiest. Okay. Maybe it was easier for you to do it.
Sure.
Okay, can you see the screen?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, is it in presenter mode, Megan?
It's not in presenter mode.
Oh,
I can see your slides on the left-hand side.
there, how's that?
Perfect.
Perfect. All right. Thank you very much for your patience, guys. So my name is Amanda Walsh. I am with Adama, Canada, and I am currently living in Prince Edward Island, and I do cover Quebec and the Maritime provinces. So we are going to go through some of our blueberry products that we have available for you this year, and hopefully some new ones that we have coming out later on in the season. If you guys have any questions, just let me know in the chat, and maybe Meg, you can stop me and let me know.
Yep, sounds good.
So thank you. So our first product is Cormorant. So it is a unique new option with multiple modes of action to control multiple stages of target pest and specialty crops for resistance management, longer protection, and improve return on investment. There you go. So Cormorant is a foliar insecticide, and as you can see, we do have quite a bit of horticultural crops available on our label. However, of interest this evening is our blueberries. Cormorant is a rapid knockdown and extended residual control. We have control of all damaging stages of target insects, including eggs, immatures, and adults. And we have excellent control from two distinct modes of action without exhibiting harsh negative effects on beneficial insects. So how does Cormorant work? There are two active ingredients in our product. One of them is a group 15, which is novaluron, and it is a chitin inhibitor, so it is a growth regulator, and it does target eggs and immature insect stages. Immatures are then unable to molt, so they can't mature and reproduce. The second active is acetamiprid, and it is a group 4A. So it is a nicotinic receptor modulator, and it does affect sucking pests systematically, preventing them from being able to feed. So traditionally, and control. So traditionally, sorry about that, larvicidal control is, actually I don't know if you guys can hear or not. Can you hear that video, Megan?
No, I can't. I just hear you. I don't hear a video.
Okay, perfect. Nope, that's fine. So traditional larvicides kill larvae as they crawl across residues or when they're bore into the fruit. So newly hatched larvae enter the fruit within 2 to 3 hours. However, newer larvicides such as cormoran, they must be consumed to be effective. So the coverage is really important when applying cormoran. So control at the egg stage, there's 2 different ways to affect eggs prior to hatch. So you can either apply before the eggs are laid, so which is your residual control, or you can apply over the top of the laid eggs, which is topically. So the 2 active ingredients in cormoran mean it has both topical and residual ovicidal activity. Cormoran is available at your retail, so Churro Agrimart will have cormoran available. Active ingredients are novaluron and acetamiprid. So you have a group 4A, which is your acetamiprid, and a group 15, which is your novaluron. It is an EC formulation, and it is a 2 by 10.08 liter jug, and there's 2 per case. So there's no adjuvants required, and it replaces a sale, which is your acetamiprid, and your Ryman, which is your novaluron. So, and again, here you can see that our cormoran label has an extensive list of pests that we do control. And of interest to us this evening would be aphids, blueberry flea beetles, blueberry gall midge, blueberry maggot, blueberry spanworm, flea beetle, and spotted wing Drosophila. So just to name a few, the rates are 750 mils to 1,400 mils per hectare. So it'll depend on what crop that we are, or what pest that we are going after. Your reapplication interval is 7 days, and your pre-harvest interval is 8 days. Your re-entry interval is 12 hours for any other activities. So here we have a summary of 4 blueberry trials in 2018 for the spotted wing Drosophila. So as you can see, 500 mils per hectare of cormoran, we get 67% control. At 750 mils per hectare, you have 79% control. Cormoran at 1 liter per hectare rate is 83% control, and cormoran at 1.25 liters per hectare does get you your 85% control. And versus your straight novaluron or Ryman at 63% control at the 750 mils per hectare rate, as well as your acetamiprid or straight Assail at your 86 grams per hectare rate, which is your 68% control. Oh, do we have a question? Do we have a question, Megan?
Yep, there is one question. What impact does it have on native pollinators?
Oh, we're gonna go through that. So it is a group for a product, so it is softer on your beneficials, but it is best to make sure that you do apply it earlier. The earlier the better, so that you do allow your beneficials to give them a good head start. So your cormoran tank mixes, you have your cormoran, then you do your tank mix partners. So registered tank mixes, again, would be in your horticultural crops. And if you do have any tank mixing questions, feel free to ask me directly, and we can look at those for you. Chat. What impact does it have on native pollinators? Well, it is still a neonic. While it is softer, one of the softest neonics, it will kill them if you do not apply it at the proper time. So quick tips for cormoran is to consider early applications to prevent that and to ensure that you do keep your beneficials around. So make sure you consider early applications to allow beneficial insects to build up later in the season, and to minimize the possibility of transient effects on honeybee brood development. Don't use cormoran on blooming crops when bees are actively foraging. So you would actually not see the bees dying in the field. It would impact the broods at the hive level. If orchards have been historically infested or fields with mites or aphids, be sure to scout regularly and use miticides to control their populations. And the best timing for cormorant is just prior to the first generation of egg hatch. So in summary for cormorant, cormorant provides an excellent control of key pests in blueberries. You get your rapid knockdown action combined with residual control. You have improved level of control due to complementary activity from two modes of actions, your novaluron and your acetamiprid, and you have excellent, it is an excellent resistance management tool for you. So that's what we have for cormorant. The next product that we have is Bumper 432 EC. It's a broad spectrum systemic fungicide that protects against yield and quality losses due to leaf diseases. So Bumper 432 EC is a propiconazole. There's 432 grams per liter of active ingredient. It is a group 3. And it does replace Tilt and Pivot. And I know that Tilt is no longer available this year. So you would have your propiconazole available for you going forward. You would want to use Bumper in your blueberries to control your mummy berry. So your first application is when flower bud scales first appear. And your second application is 10 days later. And the rate is 300 mils per hectare. So a quick tip for Bumper is that it should be applied as a preventative disease control, and established diseases are more difficult to control and may have already reduced crop vigor, as we know. Our third product is another fungicide, Captan WSP. The active ingredient is Captan. It is a group M4, so it is a multi-site fungicide, and our formulation is 80% guaranteed active of Captan, and it is water soluble pouches. So our packaging is that you have 4 foil bags that contain 5 pouches of 0.5 kilograms per case. So it would be 500 grams per individual pouch. And you would want to use Captan for fruit rot and mummyberry control. And you would use 2.25 kilograms and 1,000 liters per hectare. And your pre-harvest interval is only 2 days. So it is a great product to get in there as your group M. So quick tips is that the enclosed pouches containing Captan 80 WSP are water soluble and will dissolve completely in water. After opening the outer bag, drop the required number of unopened inner pouches into spray tank as directed, and you reseal outer bag to protect remaining pouches. Do not excessively handle water-soluble pouches or expose to moisture, since they may cause breakage. And do not allow pouches to become wet prior to mixing spray solutions. Our fourth product is Arrow All In. Now, it is clethodim. So it's 120 grams per liter. Both Arrow All In and Arrow 240 are a clethodim product, and it is currently only registered on high bush blueberries. So the only difference between Arrow All In and Arrow 240 is that with Arrow All In, your adjuvant exact is already co-formulated into your clethodim jug. So one case will actually do 2 times the acres than a case of Arrow 240 will do. So currently, as I mentioned, we do have high bush blueberries registered, and this was just to show you that we are currently working to expand our clethodim label to include low bush blueberries. So stay tuned for label expansions going forward. High bush blueberries, the pre-harvest interval is 14 days, and the maximum application is 0.76 liters per hectare applied per crop year. And depending on the grass species that you're going after, you will have your varying rates. So we do control all the way from foxtails all the way to quackgrass control. So Arrow 240 is the exact same almost as Arrow All In, except in one case, you would be getting 1 jug of clethodim and then 1 jug of exact, and it does half the acres that Arrow All In will do. Again, only registered on high bush blueberries currently. However, we are working on label expansion, which is really exciting news for the blueberry industry. Your pre-harvest interval is 14 days, and your maximum application of Arrow 240 on high bush blueberries is 0.38 liters per hectare per crop year. So again, these rates would be equivalency of the Arrow all-in and all of the exact same grasses that are controlled on both labels. So quick tips for Arrow 240 is that it works best when applied actively on actively growing weeds. So regrowth of tillers may occur if applied to weeds under stress conditions, and Arrow 240 must be used with the adjuvant exact. And lastly, the very exciting product. So just as a disclaimer, we are not currently registered yet. So our last fungicide would be Soratel. So it's currently being assessed for registration under the Pest Control Products Act, and it cannot be manufactured, imported, distributed, or used in Canada at this time unless explicit authorization has been obtained from Health Canada to use this product for the purpose of conducting research under the Pest Control Products regulations. In the chat, I have no sound. Can you guys hear me, Megan?
I can still hear you. That's the only issue I've heard so far. So
Okay.
I think it's okay.
Okay, great.
Yeah, someone else said they can hear, so maybe it's that person's, I'll message them.
Okay, thank you. So Soratel quick info is that the active ingredient is prothioconazole. It will be a differentiated EC formulation with patented solvent technology. So it is a broad spectrum fungicide that may be used in various crops. We are looking at having blueberries on our label, and it is a group 3 triazole fungicide with broad spectrum systemic activity. Oh. So what makes us different than the other prothioconazole formulations is that we have as ascorbital formulation technology, and this ascorbital technology is exclusive with Adama and will be included in our formulations going forward. So it's really exciting, and it is the first time that this type of technology is used in agricultural chemicals. So what is it? So it is a unique formulation that includes a patented solvent technology resulting in higher efficacy, and you do not need any additional surfactant added to the product. So the benefits is that it increased penetration of the leaf efficiency, reduce runoff and photodegradation, improve rain fastness, and it also increases the amount of active that enters the plant. And it does have a uniform spreading of dissolved prothioconazole and more thorough protection of the foliage. So for future products, Soratel, like I mentioned, is the first product based on this novel formulation technology. Additional ascorbital-based differentiated products will be available for the Canadian market in the near future, and this product is exclusive with Adama. So Soratel is it's a better formulation than other prothioconazoles on the market, and it does have improved migration and leaf uptake. So I don't have, because it is so new, we are currently working on our blueberry testing to provide you with that information directly. However, I am very excited to show you what it looks like in other wheat products. So here is a migration test. Prothioconazole 250 is on the left, and the prothioconazole 275 EC, which is a European formulation, is on the right. So you can see here that we're evaluating the migration and translocation ability of the product in the wheat leaf. And on the left-hand side, you can see here is our protected area, much further down the leaf versus the protected area here, application area. So you can see that it is moving. Preventative treatment was selectively applied on the central section of the incision leaf fragment, and leaves were inoculated with calibrated septoria-spore suspension and incubated for 16 days. Disease symptoms were evaluated and quantified. So prothioconazole 250 EC demonstrates better leaf migration and protects larger leaf area. The second test that we did is an uptake test. So the biokinetic test objective is evaluation of uptake and penetration of the active ingredient to the wheat leaf itself. So the prothioconazole 250 EC of Adama is on the left-hand side versus the European prothioconazole 275 EC. And you can see here that prothioconazole 250 EC Adama's prothioconazole retained protection ability even after washing with solvent solutions, apparently due to the better active ingredient uptake of the prothioconazole. So you can see here that there is better uptake. And third test that we have is translaminar activity testing. So the objective of this test was to evaluate the translaminar activity of the product in wheat leaf tissue. And the experimental setup was that we had a treatment that was applied on the adiaxal leaf surface, and leaves were inoculated on the surface with septoria-spore suspension and incubated for 16 days. The disease symptoms on both leaf sides were evaluated and quantified. So we have the up-facing leaf surface and the down-facing leaf surface on your right-hand side. So prothioconazole 250 EC demonstrates complete protection of the leaf on both sides. So you can see a very good translaminar activity. So prothioconazole improved is that Soratel is the only product with a sorbitol formulation technology. You do get improved leaf surface penetration. You do get improved translaminar migration in the leaf. And it is another innovative example of Adama's leading position in formulation developments. So these are the different currently, and we do have blueberries on there. This is just to show you the difference in DON levels in wheat, just for superior formulation. However, going forward, we will have our blueberry trials and information to show you as the product is registered. So Soratel summary is that you have a broad spectrum fungicide for use in multiple Canadian agricultural crops. Blueberries is definitely one of them, and leading active for fusarium suppression and in your wheat and barley and corn, but also for your in blueberries. And it is a unique proprietary prothioconazole EC formulation and excellent broad spectrum disease control and crop safety. So that is it. Does anybody have any questions?
There was a question on acres. Let me just find it here. There's some other chats. How many acres will these products cover? It's kind of a general question, but if you want to touch on that, Amanda, maybe some key ones.
Yeah, so it'll depend on what pest you're going after and the pressure of that pest. So if it's insects, it'll depend on what insect you're going after and the pressure or population that you have. So it is very much recommended to read the label. And if you have specific questions, please feel free to reach out to myself directly, and I could definitely send you that information.
Yeah, and us at the Agrimart can help with that as well.
Absolutely.
All
Send
right.
the Agrimart send Agrimart the question and they will reach out to me.
We have another question. When do you think Soratel will be labeled for wild blueberry?
As soon as we receive our registration this year, it will be available this year.
Awesome.
Thank you, John.
I think that's all that I see.
We're really excited about Soratel. So it's a better formulation than Proline is the branded product.
Yeah, that's great.
Mhm.
Be exciting. It's nice to have new ones.
It is, definitely. And this one's newer formulation, so it's really exciting.
Yeah. Yeah. All
I was
right.
worried I was going to go over, so I skimmed
No,
through those.
you're good. A little early, but that's okay. I don't see any other questions. Did anyone have any other questions for Amanda? You can unmute yourself or put them in the chat.
I'll be around here also, so if you do have any questions, feel free to ask, and Megan can fire them to me, and we'll be here.
Perfect. That's great.
Thanks a lot, guys.
Okay. Thank you very much, Amanda.
Thank you.
Okay, so up next we have Tina Singal and Brodie Weagant from the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, and they're here to speak on pesticide regulation in Canada. We're a little bit early, so if you guys are ready, you guys can go ahead. If not, just let me know and I can give you a few more minutes to get ready.
I think, Brodie, we're good to go, right?
Yeah, ready to go.
So maybe you can take a minute to share your screen, get things up and running.
Perfect.
So while Brodie does that, I'll just take this time to thank AgroMart for inviting us to speak today.
Do you put my name in?
Mm-hmm.
Thank
Are you
you
seeing the
for
right?
speaking.
What is this? Yeah, finish up.
Yeah, Brodie, I can see the presentation.
Okay. And it's full screen now?
It's in note view,
No.
so I'm not sure if you can swap out. Okay.
I think you can right click and hit, just right click with the mouse.
Yep.
And sometimes there's an option there to go into presenter view.
Okay.
So as Brodie gets that up and running, I'll take this opportunity to introduce us. My name's Tina Singal, as mentioned, and this is my colleague, Brodie Weagant, and we are from the Pest Management Regulatory Agency. We're part of actually the Agricultural Stakeholder Engagement Unit. And so this unit was actually formed a few years ago to, excellent, we've got that.
That's good, okay.
And yeah, we're good. So like I said, the unit was formed a couple of years ago to engage agricultural stakeholders and really make sure that we're getting the use information we need, but also to promote understanding of our risk assessment process. And that's what we're here to discuss today. So Brodie's going to take you through our risk assessment process, and then we're actually going to talk about a specific example, a reevaluation that I know is near and dear to the heart of blueberry growers, and that's Fosmet Imidin. So that'll be coming at the end of the presentation. So Brodie, if you're ready to go, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you, Tina. Okay, so it looks like a full screen for everybody.
Yep.
And
yeah.
Great.
no trouble hearing me?
No, I can hear you.
So yeah, I'll start with an overview of PMRA, and we'll get down into a little more detail as we go. So PMRA is part of Health Canada, and it's the Pest Management Regulatory Agency, which regulates pesticides in Canada. And it's under the authority of the Pest Control Products Act, which is our legal framework for that. So in PMRA, we look at sort of two streams. One is new pesticide registrations. So these are registered following a detailed review, and it's usually large amounts of scientific data that are supplied by the applicant. So these new pesticides must show that their product does not pose unacceptable risks to health and the environment, and that the product has value. The other area we look at is registered pesticides that undergo a post-market review. It's a reevaluation process. So pesticides that have been registered for 15 years, they are in a cyclical reevaluation, and we review these pesticides after this 15 years, continued acceptability. Sometimes there's new information that's out, new scientific data, and things have changed in 15 years for crops themselves, and we review that information. Something else for these post-market reviews that we look at is a special review. So that's if a certain trigger that can spark a review, and this can be based on additional information that comes to light that might lead to certain risks for health or the environment, or if another OECD country, if they cancel a product completely or a pesticide completely, we'll look into why that's happened and might conduct a special review. So PMRA relies on stakeholders. So that's people who have an invested interest in the pesticide. And that can be federal, provincial partners, growers, and we get a lot of current use information. We're going to talk about that a lot as we go. We also look at published scientific literature. Industry provides information, and all this input into our risk assessments of pesticides that we conduct. Okay, so a little bit of overview for the new pesticide registration. This is a company that has created a new pesticide and they want to register that. So first thing they do is they send in all their information, and PMRA will verify that the information is good, and we'll screen that data to make sure there's no gaps in the information we need to conduct our risk assessment. And once we have all that data, we review it and we conduct our risk assessment. And following the risk assessment, we can determine if additional mitigation measures are needed, if that's additional buffer zones or any restrictions, additional personal protective equipment, things like that. So after we have our risk assessment and mitigation completed, we publish our proposed decision on the canada.ca website, and that's open for public consultation. So after our public consultation, we can get additional information or just comments received that maybe we didn't consider or that we need to consider a little further. New information that comes in can help sort of refine some of those elements. And after we look at all that additional information, a final decision is released on our website again, and then the product is registered. So for a new pesticide, almost all the data comes from the registrants, as it's their chemical that they've produced. And as I mentioned, yeah, those decision documents, the proposed and the final, are posted on the internet. Something else in the new pesticide registration, there might just be a new use. So there might be a registered pesticide on the market and they add a new use. So this review will follow a similar procedure, but it's important to note that only major decisions will require consultation. So a major new use. So if if there's a field crop registered for say wheat, and then if you just want to add barley to the label, that's not a major new use, so we don't need to consult on that. We'll just release an evaluation report and have that use added to the label, assuming all risks were accepted. So a reevaluation process, it's a little bit more in depth, as you can see here. So for reevaluation, say we hit that 15-year mark, we start with our initiation, and that's where we let everyone know that we're starting this reevaluation. We'll reach out to the registrants of the pesticide to confirm support for that use or for that pesticide, and to provide a list of data that we need to start our review. After we do that, we go into the scoping. So we look into the data that we have, and also what entails for the reevaluation, what we need to focus on if there's specific areas for that. So that's sort of a preliminary review where we focus our reevaluation. So depending if it's an older chemical. Maybe there's been no new uses, so it hasn't been looked at in a long time. It'll need a full reevaluation, which could take lots of data gathering and other review elements. But if it's something that's had a lot of new uses, maybe some major new uses recently, some of the assessments will have been done more recently. So we'll have some data collected already that's less than 15 years. Maybe it was only done a couple years ago. So that might not need as much evaluation time to go through all that data. So once we have a look at what we need to do that, we'll gather all that information. So we'll engage into multiple stakeholders. So not just the registrants, but the provinces and territories, a lot of users and user groups to try to get information to support the risk assessment. And that can, contain things such as the current agricultural practices. So things might have changed in 15 years, methods of application, just generally how it's used currently. And also we'll collect as much data, studies, exposure studies, field studies that we can from mostly the registrants that are required to submit that. So once we have all the data, we can start performing our reviews, and there's various areas to the review, such as the toxicology part. We'll look at the occupational exposure, as well as residential exposure or bystander exposure. We look at the food, the dietary exposure, as well as environmental risk and the fate of the chemical in the environment. So once we have our review and we've started our risk assessment, we'll develop risk mitigation measures, which could include further restrictions or even phasing out cancellation of products. So again, after our review is done, we will publish a consultation document on our website, and we'll have a consultation period where we can receive comments on certain uses or aspects of the review, as well as additional data that may have been missed during the first round of the review. Often we'll get a lot of information at this stage, and it can really delay how our risk assessment progresses. So we like to have that information up front where we have it in our information gathering stage. So after our consultation, we'll review that information that comes in, look at the comments, address those comments, and we'll release our final decision. So this will incorporate all that new information from the manufacturers, user groups, public, and then those decisions will come into force. So if you're interested in any chemicals that you may use, we do publish a 5-year work plan annually where we indicate which steps various pesticides are at in reevaluation, as well as what reevaluations are coming up in the future, and the anticipated timelines for some of these decisions that will be made. So we'll get a little bit more into the risk assessment process. So where all the data goes once it comes into PMRA. So we have our review streams. The 4 major review streams are the chemistry, the value or efficacy streams, and we look at the human health as well as environmental risks. So prior to registration and during post-market reviews, such as reevaluation, the necessary evaluations in each review stream are conducted. So the registrants are responsible for addressing the data requirements, but we also gather additional information as much as we can on current uses from provinces, territories, user groups, as we said, non-government organizations, published scientific literature, other regulatory agencies, such as the EPA or EFSA in the European Union. We'll look at any information they've done as well. So the chemistry is pretty simple. We need to know what the pesticide is. So we will review the product chemistry data that comes in to make sure the chemical is what it is, and we'll determine that it's an individual source of the active ingredient, is a unique source and not something that it's not supposed to be. They also look at any microcontaminants or breakdown products that occur during the manufacturing of that pesticide. And these can be subject to safety assessments as well. So this data is usually solely provided by registrants and manufacturers. So for our value section, there's sort of, the two parts again, the pre-market, so that's our new pesticide registration. And they really look at the efficacy of the product, that it does what it says it's going to do, it does what it claims. They'll look at things like crop tolerance in efficacy tests, and they'll consider resistance management issues for different chemical groups. For post-market reviews, it's a little bit different. So they'll summarize the use pattern for the active ingredient based on sort of the label uses, and that'll form the basis of the risk assessment. And that's where some of the use information also comes into play, which we'll continue to talk about. They may assess availability of alternatives. So if there's risks identified, they'll look at the pest, and if there's alternatives that can deal with that pest, and if it's maybe a more crucial need for that, we'll consider that. We provide feasibility of the risk mitigation measures. So if RAIs, restricted intervals, become too high, they can provide input to the risk assessment to say maybe that's not feasible, we need to look at other alternatives, or if it's just too high, something maybe can't. So this data can come from many different sources, from the registrants again, the provinces, territories. They collect user information, user groups, and non-government organizations. So the process, again, for some of the reevaluation after the initiation and scoping, so we know what we're looking at, we really gather that information. So the relevant product labels are summarized, and they're circulated to registrants, grower groups, to have a verified use that is confirmed from these individuals, these stakeholders. So additional information is sought on how the products are currently used as well. So that can help refine the risk assessment in the end. So if the maximum label rate is never used in practice currently, that's information that can help our risk assessment. So once we have that verified use, the scientific risk assessments can be conducted, and that can use just default values, so maximum rates, maximum number of applications, as well as some of that verified label information that we have. If risks are identified, refined risk assessments may be conducted using current pesticide usage information. So a lot of that information will help to refine where we can save some uses or reduce restrictions. If required, risk management options are developed based on that currently available usage and current agricultural practices. So once we have our assessments, we have a proposal that we publish, and this undergoes public consultation. So generally at this time, a lot of information is submitted, and and so the information that comes into play. So uses proposed for cancellation is received, which may result in further refined assessments for development or other risk management options. So a lot of people pay attention to this stage especially, but sometimes it can be late to receive a lot of this information. So again, we prefer to have this information in advance and have help looking to collect that information before. So we're working on ways that we can do that to help our assessments move a little smoother. So usually we start with our default risk assessment. So that summarized information from labels, that'll be maximum application rates, maximum number of applications, all the target pests that are currently on the labels. And we'll look at things, application timing and other use information. So if we're finding risks, we can refine that risk assessment. And that's where a lot of the stakeholder input can come into play. So we'll have the typical application rate. As I said, maybe it's maximum of 5 applications on the label, but if only 2 are used in practice, that's information that can help refine that assessment and save uses or reduce restrictions. Other information here that is considered, so average number of applications, critical pests, when pesticides are generally applied, % crop treated, things like this can really help the assessment. So another section that we have is our health evaluation section. So the purpose of the health risk assessment is to only allow products.
Sorry, Brodie, to interrupt.
Yep.
I think there might be a lag,
Oh,
or did you switch over the slide?
oh, okay. Yeah, is that it? Okay, thank you. Yeah, so the purpose of the health risk assessment is to allow products that present acceptable risk and minimize the possibility of harm to human health. Review data to determine the amount and duration of exposures. We consider sensitive populations, and this entails looking at the tox data, so the potential effects that that pesticide might have on your health. And we'll look at the routes of exposure. So if that comes by inhalation through the skin or ingestion, and we compare those to look at the acceptable levels of human exposure based on the toxicology data. So this is, again, data that's provided by registrants, but also provinces and territories for a reevaluation, user groups, and other areas. So the health risk assessment looks at human health, and it looks at the dietary exposure, occupational and residential, and the bystander exposure. So how those come together. So we have our toxicology and exposure. So the toxicology, it looks at the doses. So how much of the pesticide produces an effect. So they'll look at the lowest observed adverse effect. So at the lowest dose that you start seeing negative effects. And we try to find the dose that observed adverse effects are shown. And this is sort of a target level that we can establish for comparing to the exposure levels that we have. So some of the reference doses that we have are the acute reference dose. It's a short term. I'll get into this a little bit more. Next slide. Acceptable daily intake. So that's more of a longer term exposure. Reference doses for occupational and residential scenarios. And we also look at the potential that the pesticide could cause cancer. For the exposure side, consider the routes of exposure. So I said some of that ingestion, the oral exposure, or inhalation or dermal exposure. And we quantify the level. So how much do you get? How much exposure do you get handling and applying the product after application when you're re-entering the field, or from sources such as food and drinking water? So we compare our tox and exposure to get our risk assessment. And from that risk assessment, we can develop risk mitigation or risk management strategies to help reduce those risks from exposure. So the reference doses I had mentioned above. So an acute reference dose, that's a dietary reference dose that they look at. So that's the amount that can be adjusted orally any given day without any human health concerns. So we have that no effect level. We want to know if you eat enough food from a day that you're not going to reach a level that is near that you'll start seeing effects. So this is compared to high-end single-day consumption data. So we have survey data that shows what people eat over a day, over months, over years, and we compare our tox values, our reference doses, to that consumption data. So we do look at sort of a maximum dose for sort of a single event. So almost like a poisoning event, if you ate so much of it, what would happen just at one point? But we also look at if you have more of an average dose over a lifetime. So that's our acceptable daily intake. And we'll compare that to consumption data over a longer period of time. For occupational and residential reference doses, as we say, we look at the different routes, the dermal, the inhalation, or incidental oral. So even children who are rolling around on grass and then do hand-to-mouth events, we'll consider those exposure scenarios in our assessment. And similar in occupational, we'll look at different durations of exposure. So if you only apply the product one time a year, that's a short-term assessment. But if it's something that you're applying every 2 weeks over a period of several months, intermediate term, and if it's something that's used all year long, it's a long-term assessment. So as I said, yeah, these incidental exposures for infants and toddlers, they're definitely considered in our assessments. So this slide won't go into it, it's just to show that there is a lot of information that goes into our assessments. For tox, there's all sorts of different specifics in the studies. For exposure, there's many different scenarios and routes that can happen. So a little bit more dietary assessment. It's fairly simple how it's done, but there's a lot that goes into it. So it just takes the consumption. So how much of a food somebody eats, the residue, how much pesticide could be on that food that you're eating, and then compared to the tox profile. So what could happen if you ate too much of it? So the consumption is based on national food consumption survey data. So it's a lot of surveys that have been done with all age groups over a lot of time to get a general idea of what the diet of people in Canada looks like. We share that data a lot with the US, so we'll have sort of a good mix or a good amount of survey data. For the residues, this information comes from field trials that the pesticide is applied to the crop and is studied to see how much residue is remaining on that food source. It can also come from monitoring data, where they'll go to the store, pick out some apples, and they get studied to see how much residue is on it at that time. Wrong side. So for an occupational assessment, just to take away here, so there's different tiers. So a tier 1, it's sort of our default values and generic data. So default values are like that maximum rate, the maximum number of applications. The generic data, it comes from exposure databases. So task forces have been put together and they've organized the development of exposure studies to get a good sort of idea of what applicators' exposure would look like. And we can use that for a range of different pesticide chemicals. It's not specific to one chemical. So some of the databases we have, for example, the pesticide handlers exposure database. So it looks at mixing and loading and applying by ground boom, air blast, handheld equipment, things like that. The agricultural handler exposure task force. They're still conducting new assessments for these similar things. So aerial application, all kinds of different application methods. And that's ongoing. So we're trying to keep that information as up to date as possible. And for post-application, there's an agricultural reentry task force. So that compiles a lot of field data from workers who have gone in the field and they measure that kind of exposure that they may get from treating foliar or from contact with treated foliar. Some of the defaults, area treated per day, time spent in a treated field doing past harvesting or different weeding events. And our default will be a baseline personal protective equipment. So that could just be long sleeve shirt, long pants. So that's how we do our tier 1. From there, we can refine it a little bit, we'll add dermal absorption data. So if you get a chemical on you, maybe not 100% of that goes right into your body. So dermal absorption data can refine a little bit how much exposure you may actually be getting. And then tier 3 is just further refining that. So maybe some biomonitoring data where you actually study somebody who's been using the chemical in the field in an actual scenario, and you can find out how much exposure they're actually getting. If that all still results in risks of concern, it won't be approved, and the use could be canceled. Lagging a bit too. Okay. So a little bit more on the mixer loader applicator exposure. So we'll look at some mitigation and how the assessment progresses. So with increasing mitigation, we start with our baseline PPE, as I said, open mixing loading. So you're just dumping that chemical from an open bucket, maybe getting a little bit of exposure from that. Open cab tractor, so as you're spraying, there's a higher potential for that. And this is our baseline PPE here. If we find there's risks with those sort of default values, we can add mitigation. So a closed system where you're pumping it in a closed item, closed cab tractor. We'll add some coveralls and still check the exposure. If there's still risks, we can jump up to full PPE. So that's chemical resistant coveralls, respirators, things like that. And if still risks, we'll look at what the use information says. If the label has 1 to 2 kilograms, but maybe the 2 kilograms isn't needed or isn't used very often, and you can accept just the lower rate, that could reduce some risks and save some uses. If all that still identifies risks, use is often canceled. So in a post-application scenario, similar progression here. For workers entering a treated field, we have our 12-hour minimum RAI. So we always have this, and this is to allow residues to dry, vapors to dissipate, and that limits the potential tox effects right away, and that's very important. So wet residues can really increase the exposure. But if there's risks at that time, so we have our residue data that shows how residues are affected over time, that they do decrease. So maybe we have to increase the REI for a few days, and that'll lower the residues by the time you enter the field, but there's the risks aren't there. If you're still seeing risks, we look at reducing the number of applications. If it's, again, applied 5 times, if we reduce it down to 2 or maybe even 1, that might be necessary to conserve that use. Same with the reduced application rates, but there's still risks. Those could be canceled. So there's often a lot of confusion about pre-harvest intervals versus the restricted entry intervals. So we do have a fact sheet on our website. So this information is sort of taken from that. So it's how an REI is different from a PHI. So the main difference is the REI is the amount of time between application of the pesticide and when workers can enter to do hand labor tasks on the crop, versus the PHI, which is the minimum amount of time between the last application of the pesticide and when the crop can be harvested. So you really need to focus on that label and always respect both the REI and PHI. So whichever one is longer, that's the one you have to follow. So a little timeline of sort of exposures here. There's, after you apply for 4 hours, there's definitely no entry permitted. Between the 4 hours and 12 hours, a certified applicator may enter as long as there's no hand labor or no contact with treated foliage. 12 hours after application if the REI is longer than 12 hours. There's no entry permitted for no contact and during if you do enter. So agricultural workers may enter, but there's no hand contact or hand labor tasks being performed. And then after your restricted entry interval, then you can go in to do those tasks that involve contacting the treated foliage or crop, and that's how that works. So a PHI provides growers with the information required to ensure that the residues in the treated crop or produce will not exceed the maximum residue limit. So that's why we have the PHI. As we said, yeah, the minimum REI allows for those residues to dry and vapors to dissipate from the field. So what do you do if the REI is 12 hours and the PHI is 0 days? As we said, it's that longer time, it's the 12 hours. A little bit specifically, the REIs apply to hand labor tasks. So mechanical harvesting could occur if the PHI is shorter than the harvesting REI, provided there's no worker contact with the treated surfaces. So if you have a 3-day hand harvesting REI, but the PHI is 1 day, you cannot go into hand harvest until 3 days. But if you're mechanical harvesting and there's no contact with that treated foliage, you can go in after 1 day to mechanically harvest. For the next section that looks at the assessments is the environment. So the purpose of the environmental risk assessment is to only allow products that present acceptable risk to the environment and minimize the possibility of adverse environmental effects. So very similar to our health assessments. So the environment assessment looks at active ingredients, the transformation products, so some of those contaminants that may show up, or just the biodegradation of the product into something else that might also have a risk associated with it. And it'll look at the formulation as well. So they review the data to determine whether changes to the use of a pesticide are necessary to protect the environment. Again, the data can be provided by many different sources, as we talked about before. User groups, provinces and territories, they can provide current information on how that's used and help to refine our assessment. So again, similar to the health assessment, it's exposure and toxicity that are compared. So they have their problem formulation. So it defines the scope of the evaluation, what aspect they're looking at in the environment that needs to be assessed. So for exposure, the potential exposure to plants and animals, to pesticide residues in different environmental media. So it could look at soil, water, and estimated concentrations in those areas are determined. And that's compared to the toxicity, which assesses the levels at which mortality or other effects, such as reduction of growth, reproductive impacts, or community level effects are observed in the target organisms that they're looking for. So identifying and predicting those adverse effects on the non-target organisms is something they're looking to prevent. So they'll want the lethal dose of those non-target organisms, what dose will harm them. And again, the no observed effect concentration. So that becomes sort of their target, and they want to make sure any exposures in the environment are less than that level. So that gives you a risk characterization. And from the risk characterization, they can have mitigation options, whether it be reducing rates, increasing buffer zones, or things in that nature. So some of the data requirements similar. I won't get into this, just that there is a lot to look at. Different studies for exposure and for toxicity that all play into the risk assessment and affect how the registration moves forward. So the risk characterization, similar again, it starts with a screening assessment. So that's based on conservative scenarios. They get their risk quotient. So that's the exposure, the estimated concentrations in the environment, and the effects endpoint. And they compare that to the level of concern. So if there's risks, they refine that assessment and to get sort of, what we say, more realistic exposure scenarios. So it's not just maximum everything. And that's where this use information, again, can really help to play into the risk assessment to conserve uses. Things such as spray runoff information that they collect, crop-specific scenarios to sort of refine those use patterns. Toxin points from higher tiered studies, which is more information.
I just clicked on that and it didn't do any different.
Okay, so additional information, yeah, data from research and monitoring. So they'll look at the exposure in the environment and try to get a refined assessment. Incident reports, so something that's identified to us that happens in the environment. This also applies to health assessments, where there's specific incidents that happen from something being used. That needs to be told to us, and it's registrant's responsibility to indicate any of these incidents that happen to the field. So we have the similar exposure and toxicology combined, so you get your risk characterization, and it leads to your risk quotients. If there's no risk, we're okay. If we're seeing some risk, we need to add those risk mitigation options. So some of those mitigations can be changes to application rate, timing methods, buffer zones, vegetative filter strips is something they're looking at a lot more these days as well. So as I said, I think there are a lot of fact sheets and other information that are available on the Canada.ca website. So there's a lot of information on there. So it might be easier just to search even PMRA fact sheets or PMRA gloves, PMRA REI, something like that can will probably populate these items right away in your search area. Okay, yeah. So moving on, as Tina mentioned, we had an example that we wanted to talk about, and that was Fosmet. So the reevaluation of Fosmet, which was identified as an important insecticide for blueberry growers, it was completed just last year. So the proposed reevaluation decision proposed cancellation of all crops due to potential risks for workers entering treated areas to conduct those post-application activities. So the calculated REIs, restricted intervals, were not considered feasible. Some of them were extremely long and obviously, yeah, not able to do those. So during the consultation period, additional information and data were received from the registrant and grower groups, including use and survey information, such as typical number of applications, timing of applications, application equipment, duration of activities, information from Lowbush blueberry scoters was something specific that was addressed. And a reduced use pattern was proposed as well. So based on the comments and additional data and information submitted, most of the agricultural uses previously proposed for cancellation were considered acceptable to continue with the use pattern changes and additional mitigation measures that were developed after that proposed document was published. So a couple of examples. So I mentioned that Lowbush blueberry scouting. So in the proposed reevaluation decision document, it was a 36-day restricted interval. But with some of the information and from user groups that scouting doesn't occur for a full day, it might be less time, as well as new tox data, that was reduced down to 4 days and was considered acceptable for users to continue using. Similarly with blueberry hand harvesting, it was a very high REI, but the new tox data and other use pattern changes, it was brought down to 14 days, which was in line more with the PHI for blueberries. One of the application methods that was assessed was the mechanically pressurized handgun. So that's a mixer loader applicator exposure scenario. And that had full PPE with respirator, but was limited to only 1 kilogram of active being able to be used per day. So with the refinements from after the consultation period, the PPE had to remain, but the amount handled per day, so you could treat more of your crop in a day with that equipment. So that sort of touched on the occupational part. For blueberry MRLs and PHIs, we know MRLs can be a point of contention, and it's a difficult thing to work with, especially across borders. So I just wanted to try to explain a little bit of that. So the PHI, that's based on field trial data. So those crop-specific exposure studies for that crop, use pattern information, and it also considers any current restrictions to protect human health and the environment. So there's differences in the studies that were used to register the blueberries between Canada and the US, and when they were submitted, have led to variations in the use patterns in this case. So there's other factors that can create variations between jurisdictions, and that can include things like different legislation, scientific interpretations, pest pressures, and in the environment, like different environments. So in our table here, in Canada, the MRL we have currently is 5 parts per million, and in the EPA it's 10. So this is an older chemical, and it was, when it was registered, there was a field trial from 1981 that was used, and that was 2 applications for a total of 2.25 kilograms of AI. And the PHI in that study was 15 days. And those elements from that study that led to the registration needed to be followed. In the USA, they had additional field trial data from 1997. And that had used 5 applications for a total of 5.6 kilograms of active ingredient of pesticide per hectare. The PHI in that study was 3 days. And that's what the EPA used. So when Canada did its reevaluation of phosmet, it did have this study, but the study was old and it didn't meet our current standards for use for a field trial. As well, we noticed the high maximum value in the crop of 12.6 parts per million, and that's even higher than the MRL. So if we use that data to calculate our MRL, it would have been even higher than that. But as the study wasn't considered acceptable based on our current guidelines and standards, we could not use that study. So unfortunately, the PHI and MRL could not be changed. As sort of things like in the occupational assessment, the REIs could be reduced. In this case, those studies were not acceptable to allow that to be reduced or to be matched up to. One more time. So I just wanted to note as well, our current guideline, in the absence of an MRL, the pesticide residues must comply with the general MRL, the GMRL, and that's 0.1 ppm, as stated in our food and drug regulations. So any pesticide that's not registered must, if it does come into Canada, it must be below that level, or it's just not acceptable to be imported into Canada. So some of the overall conclusions. PMRA is responsible for pesticide registration in Canada. We use a stringent science-based evaluation. We reevaluate pesticides to ensure they meet current scientific standards. And for these post-market reevaluation reviews, accurate pesticide use information becomes vital when risks have been identified and further refinements to risk assessments or risk management are required. So we work closely with provincial, territorial, and federal departments, as well as international organizations. And we do welcome stakeholder input. during the post-market review process to ensure that the best information is used to inform decision making. And we're really working on our engagement with stakeholders to try to get our transparency a little better and get this use information to help everybody have the uses that they need. So that's everything. So if you have any questions, I think we're open to that.
Perfect. Thank you, Brodie.
Still sharing. Nope.
You're just trying to unshare. Okay, great. Okay, is there any questions for Tina or Brodie?
Hi, Brodie. It's Terry Prescott.
Hi.
One of the questions the growers have often asked me, and I'll try to frame it right, is that if you take strawberries, for instance, if there was a certain fungicide used on it, and it would exceed what we consider to be acceptable levels that Canadians could consume just with what comes in imported strawberries, then as a Canadian, we wouldn't be allowed to use that particular fungicide on our crops. Is that correct?
So it's something that's been imported?
Yes. So
Or,
like, say it's just fungicide X.
yeah.
The one that could be registered in Canada, but because it's maybe like strawberries are produced 12 months of the year down in the States and we can only produce for say 4 to 6 up here.
Yeah.
So if that fungicide that was desired to be used is being used in the US, just for argument's sake, I'm using the US.
Yeah.
And the levels coming in on imported strawberries, because they come in year round, would potentially exceed the levels that you guys have determined to be a safe consumption limit, then in theory, we couldn't use that pesticide in Canada. Is that correct?
I think there's a few elements there to consider. If the pesticide would need to be registered in Canada, first of all.
Say it is.
Okay. Well, yeah, that should be allowed to be used in Canada as long as, the Canadian use follows the label rates, so that good agricultural practice that those rates are based on. But so you're saying if a lot of strawberries are coming in with higher residues from the States, will that affect Canadian uses?
Yes.
So is it basically, is the risk cup filled up just by the imports?
That's
and
right.
Then we can't have the domestic. Okay.
Because what some of the customers have said to me on different chemistries, and I can't think of one off the top of my head at the moment, but if those levels are filled up by an import and we're not able to use that chemistry, and it may be a cheaper, more economical one for us to be using as well, we put ourselves at a disadvantage then to imports. And the question becomes then, why wouldn't we have restricted the imports coming into the country sooner than put ourselves at a disadvantage?
Yeah. So when the risk assessment is done, we do consider those imported crops. And so those residues are usually considered in the assessment. So that shouldn't impede any use for Canada or the States to have strawberries all year round. But if residues start getting above those MRLs that are set in Canada, those strawberries shouldn't be allowed into Canada. They'll be returned or they'll be destroyed. So that's the theory behind that.
Take a look at your the example you used with Imidan.
Yeah.
They had a higher level, so in theory, say Imidan came in on apples and blueberries and other things like that, down the road, it's conceivable that we could lose the use of Imidan in Canada if you look at potentially just the imports containing those levels. And I know I've heard the comment made that you guys have no ability to control what other countries use.
Right.
Only what Canadians do. And so we're just trying to understand how or why.
I think if something was being reevaluated and it was found that residues were high, and that then if risks started being determined in those assessments from these extra high uses that are showing up, then yeah, there could be consequences for registration of that pesticide.
Mm.
But I'm not sure if I can think of, like, are you able to provide concrete examples that we can look into? Because I don't really know of examples where we would then lose a use because the imports have now filled the risk cup.
I'll try to think
So
of
yeah,
some.
like if you can
Sure.
follow up, then we can look into that, because
Yeah.
I can't really think of a scenario where that would really be the case, right? The exports have, at whatever level, have now filled the risk cup, and it doesn't allow for any domestic use. So, and I don't know if maybe you're talking about a scenario where we've like, I don't know that it would result in our losing a use.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'd have to look into that more, because I can see what you mean in terms of a disadvantage where people can use it because they have this higher MRL and now it's coming in. And if we already didn't have the use, or the use had been removed, but I can't think of a scenario where you're kind of pitting like domestic and import use, and the imports have filled the risk cup. So I'd
Probably
have to.
it's more of a product that has been removed.
Right. Okay. So then it's more about that, like, why is this fair?
Yes, exactly.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Growers have said, then why shouldn't those imports be restricted if they have that particular chemistry on it, sooner than restrict Canadian use and then put ourselves at a disadvantage by having to use something that's maybe more expensive or whatever the case might be.
Well, and sometimes what happens actually is, if a risk has been identified, especially a dietary risk, we will maintain the MRL, right? And so we could keep a Canadian MRL where we don't want things coming in at 10, let's say,
Sure.
right? So that, because the risk has been identified at that, at even at 5, right? So we don't want anything above that. So there will be scenarios where we maintain MRLs to try and limit imports when a risk has been identified.
So in that case, then imports would get restricted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Okay.
because you have to meet the,
And we do consider aligning the MRLs as much as possible. And sometimes, so in the example of phosmet here, it was something that we couldn't do with the data we had and the information available to align with the EPA and the Codex MRLs. But we do try to align with as much as possible.
Sure.
But yeah, with the information available, it wasn't possible for causing an event.
Yeah, no, certainly a lot of variables that come into play, and
Growers
are always asking us, and
yeah,
I don't always feel confident in answering those questions. So I just thought I'd relay a little bit of what I've heard lately from.
It's the difficult thing to try to balance those the Canadian use, import uses, and then to try to find that common MRL. That if the uses are different across those jurisdictions, then it's really difficult to sort of balance that.
Sure. Oh, you did a great job in your presentation, so thanks.
Come on, everyone, this is your chance.
Yeah, no questions. Unmute yourself or put them in the chat. We have some spare minutes, so there's time if you want to type one out.
Any other general questions too that you may have, or just curiosities?
So if we don't have anything coming in, actually, maybe I will take this opportunity just to plug something that we're working on as a unit. So I think you saw that Brodie had mentioned multiple times that use information really is important from growers, but we do acknowledge that it is hard. Like when you come to that proposal stage, your use is going to be canceled, and now you have to go out and gather this use information, especially for grower groups. And so we are trying to emphasize moving that information gathering more to the front end. And to that end, Brodie and I are actually leading a project to gather pesticide use information in a more systematic manner. So we're working with partners at Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, various grower groups at the provincial level, like basically anyone to actually characterize where we can gather this use information, where some of our gaps are, and to see how we can get it more at the front end of the reevaluation. So really our goal is that we don't get to that proposal stage where we're canceling uses if that's not needed. If that's, if that doesn't reflect the current use pattern, then hopefully we can have that addressed at the front end and we don't actually get to those kinds of proposals. So we are trying to work on a more systematic approach to gathering use information. And that's also true for some other aspects of our assessment too. Reevaluation has always been a bit of a struggle. And so we are trying to make some improvements. So I just want to let people know that that's an activity that's happening. And so if you hear about it, please participate in any way, give your feedback. But yeah, that's something that the unit is busy on as well.
Tina, could you or Brodie even talk a little bit on, or elaborate a little bit on minor use?
In which respect?
I don't know if it can be done quickly or easily, but
okay.
like for some of the blueberry growers, they're looking at products like Select right now that already has a registration in other crops, and they're trying to get it modified for going after fescues in blueberries.
Okay.
So how extensive a process is it to get that moved?
I won't lie. it can be a process, right? So basically you have to get it on the priority list. We need the data. So it's getting the residue data so that we can conduct the assessment to have it added on the label. So I don't know if you've begun the process or where things are at with that particular one. What I could do is so Andrea Martin heads up our minor use coordination section. So she would have more details on the process. A lot of things are actually coordinated out of the Pest Management Center from AFC. So that would be a good point of contact as well to gather information. But Terry, if you want, I can try and get as much information as I can to send to you. So basically you want to know what the process is?
A little bit, yes. It
okay.
Just, I mean, again, we get the questions asked and that's totally out of my ballpark, so.
Sure. So basically in that case, what it is the provinces put forward their needs, and basically there's priority setting. So across the country, where are the needs the greatest? And then that's prioritized for generation of that data. So there's funds provided by AFC to generate that data for these minor uses, because what often happens is they're too minor for the registrants to address, so they don't generate the data. So this is a mechanism to get that information so that we can actually conduct an assessment and get it on the label. Now, one of the things that we're also trying to work on is transparency around that risk cup that I was talking about, so that people know, okay, if you're close to the edge, you know, there might have to be negotiations with the registrant to move uses off the label before more can be added on. Like there's no point in people investing money in generating data for uses if we're close to that risk cup. So we are trying to have more transparency around that. And that's, you know, that's something that's been identified. So from a reevaluation standpoint or from a PMRA standpoint, we are trying to make some improvements for minor use as well.
Great, thanks.
No problem.
Okay, and we had one last question here. How do you calculate exposure level per day? So for example, how do you know if you are at your limit spraying 1 kg per day?
Yeah, so our assessments use sort of exposure models and some of that, those task force data studies. So that sort of shows what typical exposure is for someone who mixes and loads or applies the pesticide. So we have those values that is sort of shows how much you can get in a day. And if you apply it over multiple days, our assessment considers that, but we do have, yeah, amounts that show how much you apply today, and we base our risk assessment on that. So those are a little bit conservative as well. So we probably assume that you're not going to go over that, assuming you follow those label recommendations and label uses, that you're wearing the personal protective equipment that's identified on the label, and you're following those restricted intervals. That as long as you're following that label, you shouldn't come into a scenario where you're exceeding exposures that would lead to risk.
Perfect, thank you. I think that answers the question.
Okay, well, if there's nothing further, I really want to thank you guys for your attention here. I know pesticide risk assessment isn't the sexiest topic, but I appreciate you guys, everyone giving us your attention and inviting us here. Thank you so much, Terry.
Thank you guys very much for your presentation. We appreciate your contribution.
Very much.
A better understanding now.
Hopefully.
Okay, so our next speaker is Justin Toner from Corteva, and he's going to be giving a product update. So welcome, Justin.
The video audio.
Thanks, Megan. I'll just share my screen here.
Sounds good.
You must be done.
It was done. This one is, it's at 8 to 9. It's another point.
Yeah, I don't want that.
That one wasn't that interesting.
Yeah. Bullshit. Key product solutions from Corteva.
Just see what he says. Start out maybe.
I don't want that.
Can you see that okay?
Yep, looks great.
Great. All right. Well, thanks very much. Thanks to Terry and the entire crew from Tour Agrimart for the invitation. Really just to spend, really the next 15, 20 minutes to kind of give you an update and really kind of really just an overview of some of the key products that we have that are currently being used in wild blueberry production. Was actually just thinking today that right around this time last year, this specific meeting was the last in-person meeting that I actually attended before everything, was shut down by the pandemic. And I'm sure for a lot of you, it probably was kind of that last in-person meeting as well. So hopefully, a year later now, we're kind of on the path to kind of seeing things get back to normal here over the next couple months, I guess. So hope everyone is doing well. So with that, today or this evening, just wanted to focus really on 3 products. Wanted to talk about 2 of our herbicides, one of course being Curb, the other Altum, and also wanted to talk about one of our insecticides called Delegate. And then finally at the end, any questions, comments, concerns, we can certainly address those then as well. So first we'll start with Curb. So if you've been a blueberry grower for any amount of time, chances are you probably have used Curb on your blueberries at some point in time or multiple times most likely. So definitely a very well-established herbicide in wild blueberry production. It's a selective pre-emergent and an early post-emergent systemic herbicide that's really typically used on a number of annual and perennial grasses, as well as some broadleaf weeds as well. And so when you look at the weed spectrum, typically you're going to be targeting sheep sorrel. Most definitely fescues is really that key weed that most of you are using Curb for. Really a tough one. Quackgrass, of course, and really most annual grasses that you would see in your blueberry fields as well. So with Curb, we're using an active ingredient. It's a group 3 called propyzamide, formulated as a liquid suspension, and you're going to get 2 10-liter jugs per case. So a little bit about mode of action. So with a group 3 herbicide, really what this particular mode of action is doing is inhibiting root and shoot development in your germinating seeds or young seedlings. Initially, what you're going to see after application is going to be some swollen or club-shaped root tips. If you were to dig down below the surface a little bit. The product does offer xylem systemic activity. So once the application is completed, it's basically going to be absorbed through the plant, through the root zone initially, and then translocated up into the entire plant that way. So it is a soil active herbicide. When you look at foliar application in terms of overall leaf absorption, that really is very limited. So it really needs to get into the soil profile, into the root zone, and then translocate upward into the entire plant to really get the control that you're looking for on some of those key weeds. In terms of mode of action, despite the extensive use of curb over really decades, there hasn't been any resistance that we've seen any evidence of to date, and so it continues to work really well on those key weeds. So just a little bit, a few pictures just to kind of represent the biology of curb in terms of what you see kind of below the surface initially with those swollen root tips. And really kind of the middle graphic there showing that the product absolutely has to get into the root zone initially for it to work properly. So a few application guidelines for you. So absolutely curb needs to be applied late fall. Typically that ends up being October and in a lot of cases into November. You really want to make sure that the season or the temperatures kind of normalize and we kind of eliminate the chances as much as possible for any sort of drastic temperature swings is one of the important considerations to making sure that you get curb on it at the right time. The soil temperature is ultimately going to determine the timing of application. So you want your soil to be below 10 degrees, but of course above freezing. And really, the higher the soil moisture, the better. That will really help get that active down into the root zone and help activate the product into the plant. Like I said, increased soil temperatures. So if we do get into a situation with some pretty drastic temperature swings, that can cause a degradation of the active ingredient, where we'll actually see that active ingredient start to gas off, and then you're no longer dealing with adequate concentrations of the active to get you the control that you need. Active applications are also most effective, if at all possible, followed by rain or even some wet snow. That'll help get the product into the soil profile. And also the product in terms of soil type is going to work best in sandy or medium textured soils as well. If we're using it on, heavier clay, peat or muck soils, the active can, become tied up and bind to that soil profile and not get into the root zone where it needs to be. And the same thing is also true in soils with higher organic matter up above 4%. So just some important considerations there in terms of really ensuring that, the product performs as expected. Really important to kind of follow these guidelines when you're considering the application timing of curb. And then from there, absolutely want to wait until the berries have been harvested. You can apply curb both in the crop and in the sprout year. In terms of rates, there is a rate range there on the label of 4.1 to 5.6 liters per hectare. Generally speaking, guys are using that 5 liter per hectare rate, which gives you 4 hectares or 10 acres to a case. When it comes to water volumes, you do want to use a relatively high water volumes when you're applying curb, 300 to 500 liters of water per hectare or 30 to 50 gallons per acre. Flat fan nozzle or an air induction type nozzle is also, works very well to sort of minimize that drift and get that product, down where it needs to be. In terms of restricted entry, it is 24 hours. No rain fast period. We do get that question, fairly active. It is a soil active herbicide. So if you get some rain immediately after application, all the better. Excellent tank mix compatibility and one application per year only. So next we'll move on to Altum. So a little overview on Altum, certainly provides really excellent control of a number of annual grasses, quack grass, as well as red root pigweed in your Lowbush blueberries. It uses an active ingredient, basically 2 active ingredients from as group 2 herbicides, rimsulfuron and nicosulfuron, so classified as an ALS inhibitor. And basically these herbicides work to inhibit a specific enzyme in the plant called the acetylcholine synthase. Formulation is a dry flowable, really excellent tank mix compatibility as well. And I've also listed the 2 packaging types here as well. So the older packaging is going to be the 4 by 33.7 grams. These are the water soluble packs that have been around for quite a while now. We also have a new packaging now, which is 8 270 gram jugs per case. So we're currently only selling the newer type, the newer SKU or the newer packaging, but your dealer or your retailer may still have some of the older style packaging in inventory as well. So just important to understand that there are still two types of packaging on the market. And then for guidelines, rate of just over 33 grams per hectare. So that is, that works out to the 1 water soluble pack per hectare, or basically 8 hectares to a jug, or 20 acres. You do need to use a non-ionic surfactant as well at 0.2%, which works out to, of course, 2 liters per 1,000 liters of spray solution. You don't need to use as high a water volume compared to curb with the Altum, so minimum 150 liters per hectare, or 15 gallons per acre. For optimal performance in terms of weed staging, generally speaking, if you kind of target that 3 to 6 leaf stage, you're going to be right in that ideal window to really target both your annual grasses and your perennial grasses as well. Applications must be performed in the spring of the sprout year. So you want to make sure that the product goes on prior to blueberry emergence, because if in fact this group 2 herbicide comes in contact with the blueberry plant, you may see some initial stunting there as well. So maximum 1 application per season, and a PHI of 14 months, which of course makes sense because you are using it in the spring of the sprout year. And then finally, just a few slides on Delegate as well. So Delegate, really, kind of the flagship insecticide for us at Corteva. Very well known across multiple crops. A very robust label in terms of crops and insect spectrum as well. Currently being used on a number of key crops. Potatoes, onions, apples, and a number of berry crops as well, including wild blueberries as well. So it uses an active ingredient called spinetoram, which is a group 5 insecticide. And this spinetoram is really derived from the spinosyn chemical family. And so if you're maybe familiar with products like Success or Entrust, which is our organically certified insecticide, those products are also a group 5 insecticides, and part of the spinosyn chemistry. They actually use an active ingredient called spinosad. And then, so basically those products were kind of the first generation of these group 5 insecticides. And then we ultimately released and developed spinetoram as kind of the second generation. And what we see with Delegate is really kind of an increased level of insecticidal activity and really, better residual overall across a number of different insects and pests that you would be targeting. For formulation, it's a wettable granule formulation. So, very nice to use, very low use rates, and packaging is 6 840 gram jugs. So just a comment here in terms of safety to beneficials. Delegate is in fact, toxic to bees if they come in contact or consume wet residues. However, once the product dries, once those residues dry, the product is in fact non-toxic to bees. So when it comes to insect spectrum, we do have, a number of key pests that you would see in lowbush blueberries. Of course, SWD, spotted winged Drosophila, would be one of the key ones. Blueberry flea beetle and blueberry spanworm suppression as well. So a little bit about mode of action. So Delegate does work really in two ways, primarily through ingestion, but also through contact as well. And so really having, these two different ways to control, a number of Lepidoptera pests, really kind of in those early larval stages is really, really crucial, especially to ones that, are laying their eggs on the underside of leaves. Really, really nice attribute here to be able to control things or insects in two different ways. In terms of how does it work, it is going to basically activate that nicotinic acetylcholine receptor, which ultimately excites, the nervous system in the insect, initially causing the paralysis, which of course ultimately leads to death. And we haven't seen any evidence of any cross resistance with other chemical families or other insecticidal chemistries as well. Of course, like a group 4, your neonicotinoids, very extensively used, and certainly one of those chemicals that we're not seeing any cross resistance, which makes Delegate as a group 5 a great rotational option across a number of key crops. When it comes to speed and insecticidal activity, very fast knockdown with feeding really stopping within minutes across a number of different pests. And then death ultimately, depending on the pest pressure, anywhere from 1 to 24 hours. Also very active across multiple life stages, so what we call ovilarvicidal activity. So it will have an effect on those Lepidoptera pests as they're emerging from their egg mass, but also in their early larval stages as well. And then just a bit on rates in terms of those labeled pests. When it comes to SWD, there is a rate range there, but this can be, such a detrimental pest that can, impact, fruit quality so extensively that, we would always recommend, the full rate when it comes to controlling SWD, so that 420 gram per hectare or 170 grams per acre. And of course, application timing is going to be based on, what you're seeing at a local level. In terms of the control of blueberry flea beetle, 200 grams per hectare or 81 grams per acre, and target those at the early larval stage as well. And then suppression of blueberry spanworm. So because it's suppression only, we would of course recommend the high rate as well of at the 200 gram per hectare rate or 81 grams per acre, applying at at the egg hatch to early or small larvae stage. Using that higher rate, of course, especially for higher populations or larger larvae. And just some final application guidelines there. Restricted entry, 12 hours, rain fast of 2 hours. PHI, so your pre-harvest intervals, specific to SWD control is just 1 day. So, really, really crucial to have a very narrow PHI interval or a small PHI interval when it comes to, controlling SWD, because you are in fact right there at harvest time. So you need to get in there and harvest those berries as soon as you can. Minimum retreatment interval specific to SWD again is 12 days. We always say maximum 3 applications per year, and not to make more than 2 consecutive applications of any group 5. So whether it's Success, Entrust, or Delegate, you want to make sure that you're rotating to another mode of action after potentially 2 consecutive applications of these specific group 5 insecticides. And very excellent tank mix compatibility as well. Delegate is being tank mixed with a number of fungicides and micronutrients across, really a multitude of crops. And we're really seeing, no issue across the board there in terms of tank mix compatibility. And then finally, just wanted to make sure you knew where to find us on our website. You can certainly visit us at corteva.ca. Lots of great information on here. The website is very easy to navigate, and really, we have a specific section for horticultural crops. Of course, if you need to, access labels or looking for other information that's crop specific, certainly a great place to start is at our website. And then finally, just wanted to thank you, for your attention. If you ever have, any questions at all about any Corteva products, I wanted to put my contact information here. I certainly would be happy to talk through any questions or concerns that you might have. So with that, I can certainly open it up to any questions. If there isn't any questions, then I'll let the meeting carry on to the next speaker.
Thank you, Justin. There's a couple questions and comments about curb. So I'll just read them out. I don't know if you can see them. It is safe to say curb is a good product that addresses our fescue problems. However, it is pricing itself out of the market. Can you please explain why curb costs so much? Is there a unique input, or is this just a matter of monopoly and maximizing your profit? The industry must pursue more economical alternatives, and will this help your company reconsider its price?
Yeah, this is certainly a reoccurring question and really a concern around the pricing of curb. It's definitely something that I've elevated to both my manager and other individuals within the company to sort of understand absolutely why is the price of curb so high. And the reality is based on where it's produced and the cost of the goods and the cost to produce this specific active. It is just extensively expensive to produce and to get here in Canada. And so I understand that it is excessively more expensive than a lot of other herbicides in the market. And of course, the question at the grower level is always going to be, why is that? And you would think that, with a product that has been available really for decades, that, there might be a way to sort of there might be some sort of method to reduce costs. And the reality is it is just incredibly expensive to produce.
Appreciate that answer, Justin.
Thanks.
I don't see any other questions coming through here. So I'll thank you for your time tonight and tackling those questions.
No problem. Anytime. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. All right. Up next, we have Frederick Potvin from Gowan to talk on their key products. So welcome, Frederick.
Hey, good afternoon. Good evening, I would say. Okay, so where do I share? Here, share screen. There you go. So just gonna move this away. Okay, so here's my presentation on Gowan agriculture product. Actually, I'm gonna talk mostly about the re-evaluation of Imiden, one of our product actually for Gowan. So I don't know if you know Gowan at all. You probably don't know me either. So I'm gonna start by presenting Gowan. Gowan is probably the only chemical company in the market that is privately owned, so it's not on the stock market. You see two pictures here on the screen. It's actually the founder of the company, started the company as a field scout in Yuma, Arizona in 1963 as an entomologist, scouting hort fields. Actually, one of the key difference for Gowan is we are horticulture company globally. So anywhere around the world, 99% of our products are registered only for hort products, for horticulture crops, actually, including herbicide, insecticide, pesticide, fungicides, nutrients, and everything. There's only one place in the world, actually, where we have more herbicide for row crop, and it's in Canada. So this is pretty much who the company is. We are established in tons of country, but we are privately owned. And one of the motto of the company is to reinvest all their profits into new technology, purchasing new molecules from other companies. We're actually specialized in niche markets. So we're actually evaluating a lot of niche crops in every single country we're dealing with. Who I am, so you probably don't know me at all. I'm Frederick Potvin. I've graduated in agronomy in Quebec in 2005. I've been working in the chemical industry for quite a while now. I've started, well, my agriculture career, let's say during my school year. I was a student research assistant for Agriculture Canada, working in strawberries, wheat, and corn, especially on nitrogen split application. Then I started working for one of the major strawberry company in Quebec. So I worked there for 2 summers in a row during my school years for Les Fraises de l'Île d'Orléans. And then I graduated in 2005. In 2005, after graduation, I started being field scout in Ontario for one of the major companies in ginseng. So that was Canadian Imperial Ginseng. We had 2,700 acres of ginseng all over the southern Ontario. And then that's when I started working with DuPont right after that summer being a field scout. Worked for DuPont for 7 years at the head office, then moved back to Quebec, became a sales rep for New Farm for 3 years before transitioning into a role as a wholesaler manager with Paygrain, which is a branch of Sinagri here in Quebec. I was managing seeds and pesticides for the wholesale division over there. And then since November 2020, I transitioned into Gowan sales rep job. So you have my contact information here. If you have any question in the future, don't be shy, don't be worried. I can't wait to go visit you actually in the East. So this is Gowan portfolio product lineup all together. Right now, I'm just going to focus on Imidin, just to talk about the reevaluation of Imidin and Fosmet. But this is our complete portfolio. Permit and Shieldex and Peak are actually a herbicide used in the row crop, and there's quite a few miticide and fungicide as well. So we're actually evaluating a lot of products that might be useful for you in the future. Actually, we're trying to see if Shieldex could be a good fit for a herbicide in blueberries. So stay tuned. That might happen in the next few years because we're going to do trials this summer. Imidin insecticide group 1B, actually, you probably know the product more than me. I've been recommending this product a lot more in apples than in blueberries because that's where I used to work a lot, actually. So PMRA reevaluation, that came out last fall during my first couple of weeks, actually, with the company. We had a reevaluation. And Health Canada, the PMRA, decided that the product was still going to be registered because of acceptable with additional risk mitigation measure. So what that means for blueberry producer, well, actually, I'm just going to get out of full screen here because I have a hidden slide here. So here we go. So those are some of the change that's going to happen actually on the Imidin label and the Imidin reentry. There were discussion in the PMRA document. So basically, what the only change for blueberry producers will be that only one application will be possible for a year. And for Field Scout, actually, there's a limited amount of hours that you can be in the field after application. So it's 4 hours per year or so. But the re-entry interval is still 3 days. We can talk about it later on, but those changes will happen in October 2022. So for the next 2 seasons, it's business as usual for Phosmet and Imidin. If you have any question around that, we don't have the new label yet. These were a recommendation made by PMRA. These changes will happen on the label. We'll have time to discuss those changes, plenty of time, I would say. These changes will be in a year and a half from now. So, but mostly the only change for blueberry growers will be 1 application. Before we had 2 applications on label possible with Imidin. And so that's the big change for Imidin. Position statement: broad spectrum insecticide that delivers knockdown and residual control with limited impact on beneficial insects. A little bit like my friend there with Corteva said about delegate beneficial insects. Imidin, as long as it's dried out on the leaves, won't be hurtful to bees or other beneficial insects. So it is active on them if you spray straight on top of them, but it won't be a problem if the product dries out. Supporting points: broad product label, residual control after application for up to 21 days, depending on rate. Alternate mode of action to IGR and narrow range chemistry, proven and trusted by fruit and nut growers throughout the world. Research, publication, studies on low impact to beneficial insect, like I said, that is when the product is dried out on the plant. Actually, Imidin normally gets into the first layer of the leaf, so as soon as it dries out, you're okay with it. So basically, like you probably know that already, Imidin is registered on blueberry spanworm, on blueberry maggot, Japanese beetle, and SWD, spotted winged Drosophila. The rate of the product is 0.65 kilogram per acre. Do not apply within 15 days of harvest. Re-entry interval is 3 days. Actually, there was one change that PMRA asked, was for pick your own. They had, we have 15 days for pick your own blueberries, and I think they were gonna put it to 25 days. But so far with the question PMRA got from customer groups and things like that, they said, well, pick your own blueberries is not a big deal anymore. It is an eyebush blueberry, but eyebush blueberries are totally different species. They react differently. So we can't use the data that we have for white blueberries to change the label for eyebush blueberries. So there is reevaluation for eyebush blueberry, but that's a different story, different provinces, I would say. Second application may be required if necessary. That's actually on the label right now. Like I said, starting in October 2022, we won't be able to apply twice a year. So that's basically what the product is registered for. I'm just going to bring it back here. Properties of Phosmet: control best by both contact and ingestion activity. Broad spectrum control of Lepidoptera, Coleoptera, and Diptera, along with assorted scale and mealybugs. It's not a systemic, but Phosmet is absorbed into the wax layer of the leaf in the plant. Like I said, it's the first layer of that cell. It actually gets into the wax. That's where the product stays, and that provides it with better residual and reduced wash off. Phosmet does not accumulate in the soil. It is not stable in water above pH 6, pretty quickly in pH level over 5.5, because it degrades quite fast. Actually, I'm going to show that in the next slide. Phosmet does not have any mixing restriction except for spray tank pH, which should recommend being lower than 6. Phosphate should not be mixed with alkaline fertilizer. Yeah, here you go. So that's what I was talking about the effect of pH on imidine half-life, actually. So the higher the pH, the lower his half-life is. You can see, like, just to switch from 6 to 7 pH actually makes the products like a day and a half to 10 hours. And over 8, it's not even half an hour. So it is really important to adjust pH when you spray imidine. So summary on imidine: control the majority of insect pest problems in fruits. Residual control up to 21 days depending on the rate. Safe to most beneficial insect after application. Like I said, product needs to dry on the leaf or at least gets into the wax. That's how it is kind of encapsulated in the product. Yeah, that's right. Commitment by Gowan Company to maintain the product for the industry. We actually fought quite hard to get that product to stay registered in Canada. Actually, up to the PMRA press release, we thought the product was done for good. So it was a really good surprise for us, because we know, well, especially, well, I know personally, I know apple growers that will be in deep trouble without imidine, because actually it's part of their IPM. There is some reentry change for apple growers, actually, which is going to put imidine early in the IPM schedule of their insecticide in apple. It's a managed resistance with spray rotation that includes imidine. Like I said, it's part of the IPM, so imidine is still a tool there for that, and it's proven performance year after year. So if you need to contact me, if you have any question, if you have any trials or anything that you need to be discussing about any other Gowan product, feel free to contact me. I'm Frederick Potvin. My phone number is there, and you can also visit the Gowan Canada website for more information and for label information as well. So I think I was pretty fast there, but that's pretty much.
Thanks for your time.
Yes.
There is a question.
Yes.
Do you have a recommended buffer for imidine to adjust the pH level?
You're talking probably about the product put in the tank as I would.
Yeah, I think that's what.
Yeah, okay. Well, normally we go with the product like azote ammonia, but I would have to check what is the most recommended one, if we have a specific one that we want to go. But normally, to lower pH, we go with azote ammonia or something like, well, because it's cheap and it's easy available.
Yeah, so any acidifier.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we carry a few of them, so I think he was asking if there was a specific one that works with imidine, but
well, and that's where I'm not sure. I don't think we have a specific one that works better. I think any pH adjuster will work pretty good, actually.
Yep. Great.
Any other question?
I don't see any other questions. Does anyone want to ask Frederick another question? I don't see any, but if some come in, we can.
Not a problem at all. I'm available, so not a problem at all.
Great.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thanks so much.
Stop sharing. Have a good evening.
Thanks, you too.
Bye-bye.
Okay, so our last speaker this evening is Terry Prescott. He is presenting on behalf of Ryan Meredith with NovaSource. He's going to be talking about their herbicides and best management practices. So the floor is yours, Terry, and it looks good so far.
Is that coming up okay?
Yep, it's not in the, I can see the notes.
Okay.
All
right, thanks everyone. I will do my best to present this on behalf of Ryan, and hopefully I get it right. So what he asked me to convey to you people is that Valpar and Sinbar are just one of many tools in the toolbox, and especially because of the nature of Valpar, You want to make sure that you're using it correctly, because it's a very soluble, very high mobility in the soil, and it degrades slowly in the environment. And where a lot of blueberry fields are on sandy, gravelly soils, the chance for water contamination, groundwater contamination, is great. So he wanted just to reemphasize that best management practices need to be considered at the forefront. Know what your challenges are in terms of the weeds, and is this the best solution for what you're trying to do? And then if it is the right one, implement the program. I guess I've kind of already more or less talked about some of those things, but again, he's really asking that you consider quite hard if there's other alternative products. So if the weed infestation is very low for those Sinbar and Velpar products, then you may want to look at just using a post-emergent product. But if you do have a high woody weed concentration in the field that you're trying to control, then certainly Velpar is a great choice. And because it's a pre-emerged product, it's a good foundation product to start your weed control with. So he says that one of the main things you want to do then is, as we started to discuss, is identify which weeds you have and whether these are the right products for the weed challenges you're going after. There's certainly no silver bullets in the system. All weeds that are quite often found in a lot of our fields is going to take multiple products over possibly an extended period of time to control. So something like sheep sorrel, it's just not a single chemical out there that's going to knock that one out. You're going to have to use persistence and an assortment of products to go after it, and timing will be quite critical. It's important to know whether the weed that you're going after is an annual or perennial or biannual. And again, how much pressure is there in the fields? We all want nice aesthetic fields that have not a single weed left in it, but that's probably not realistic or attainable in most cases. So it's important to decide whether that pressure is going to be enough to hamper yields and harvest. And if it isn't, then maybe it's either a combination of hand weeding or getting the weeds when you can at another stage in the development of the blueberries, like in the sprout fields early on. So soil types and slopes, as I mentioned earlier, product like Velpar is highly mobile, so the potential for it to cause damage to groundwater is great. So you want to make sure that your slopes are, or if you're using it on a field that has slopes, that there's enough vegetation, either in terms of blueberry plants or grassed waterways, to prevent it from going into areas that we don't want it to. It's important also to understand how and when to use it. So you shouldn't be using most of these products on frozen ground or exceptionally dry soil conditions, because it's not going to work for you the way it should. So herbicides are designed to kill. That's just the nature of the beast. And even for blueberries, though Velpar or Sinbar are registered for use in them, the blueberry plants don't like them. They're just tolerating the chemistry as a means of trying to get the weeds under control. So it's important that we only use the rates that are needed to kill the weeds that we're trying to control, and make sure that it's the right weeds we're targeting with these products. So in the case of Velpar and Sinbar, where these are pre-emerged products, they're absorbed through the root. You spray them on the surface prior to sprouts germinating and poking through the soil. The organic matter and clay content quite often influence how well these products work. So very high organic matter has a tendency to tie up both Velpar and Sinbar. So in those cases, you do have to look at using the higher rates. And you also want to keep in mind when you're spraying it, what kind of weather's coming shortly thereafter. Because as I said, with Velpar being so mobile, if we were to get a very heavy rain shortly after application, quite often the Velpar is no longer where you want it. It's moved further on down the field if there's any degree of slope, or pools and hollows in the field. And that's quite often when we see some kill and damage from Velpar in blueberry fields, is at high rain levels shortly after application. as also mentioned earlier too, the drought impacts it as well. So if you had a very dry spell, quite often a lot of these pre-emerge products don't work the way you want them to. You should normally get 4 to 5 weeks of weed control and then follow up if needed with a post-emerge product. But in dry soil conditions, unfortunately, sometimes we don't get that kind of weed control that we're looking for. Matching the challenge with a solution. I don't know how well that picture's coming up, but for some of us, we have to contend with these mobile harvest weed control critters out in the back. And if we could ever control them to do the job we want, then it would be a lot better, but they have a tendency to harvest the crop that we want and leave the weeds alone. But anyhow, it's just hitting back to the fact that we got to pick the right product for the right time, and knowing what to use and when is the most important thing. So Velpar is primarily a soil residual herbicide. There is some foliar activity, but it is hard on blueberry plants. The active ingredient is hexazinone 750. It is a group 5 herbicide. The reentry period is 48 hours. With this product, as with any other products, the standard safety protocols is shoes, socks, long sleeve pants, shirt, chemical resistant gloves, face mask, respirator if you got one. Do not over agitate it, otherwise you will get into a foaming situation. For those of you that are mixing product ahead, the efficacy of it reduces considerably if temperatures drop below 7 degrees and stored for any length of time. So the Velpar can be used in both the sprout year and in the crop year. But if you use it in the crop year, there is a good risk of some damage to the crop, and the usage rate drops from what would be in the sprout year. So your rate for sprout year applications is typically 1.9 to 2.56 kgs per hectare, whereas in the post-emergent and or crop year, it's 1.34 to 1.8 kgs per hectare. It's very good at controlling grasses, most of the common grasses that we contend with: trailing blackberry, lambkill, hardhack, aster, popper, goldenrod, sheep sorrel, and poverty oatgrass. You need to use a minimum of 200 liters per hectare of water to get a good coverage with that product. This fact sheet number 250 was one they have down in the US. Basically, it's a bunch of best management practices for the use of hexazinone, and it more or less talks about not spraying on steep slopes. If you got rock outcrops, then they recommend that you don't use Velpar, because unfortunately rocks can have cracks in them, and then they can be a funnel to the groundwater resources, and you risk contaminating groundwater. Singal is also a residual soil activated pre-emerge chemical. The active ingredient in it is tubersol 80%. 2 is a group 5 herbicide. Its main claim to fame is control of annual grasses, sheep sorrel, and sedges. The re-entry interval is 12 hours. Degradation of the spray solution can occur if not used within 24 hours. And there's a strong cautionary line on the label that says, don't mix with Venturel or apply within 2 weeks of Venturel, otherwise you run the risk of crop injury. So just make sure that you're paying attention to that. Again, a minimum of 200 liters per hectare of water in the spray solution, and the standard PPE equipment should be always used with Singal with Velpar. So a few parting points. Information and knowledge is crucial. Be informed, always read and understand the label before you use it. Observe all safety precautions. Make sure your equipment is properly serviced and calibrated. There's nothing worse than going to the field with plugged nozzles and then trying to fix the problem out in the field. You'd save yourself an awful lot of aggravation, lost time, and risks your own personal injury by trying to unplug nozzles out in the field when you should be spraying. Make sure to apply the 4R principles: right source, right rate, right time, right place. Weed control is always about utilizing all the entire tools in the toolbox. So make sure to use a pre-emerge product where it's needed, and then follow it up with the proper post-emergent applications when needed of other products. Protection of the environment and stewards of our industry is everyone's responsibility, so be all part of the team. That's all I had for you. If there's any questions, I do my best to answer them on behalf of Brian.
Yep, I got one question here, Terry. Someone asked if Velpar is liquid now.
Not in Canada. In the US, it is, as I understand.
Okay.
I don't believe there's any intentions to make that available in Canada. It's been in the States actually for a number of years.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. I'm gonna share the CCA code for anyone that needs that, if I can figure
So while
it
you're
out.
doing that, Megan, I'm going to have a few other comments to make.
Yep.
So first off, I just want to remind everyone that we have added a fourth Tuesday to these sessions on the 23rd. LP Consulting and Agri-K will be presenting on some research trials that they've been conducting for the last several years on wild blueberries and soil fertility and micronutrient requirements. So just keep that in mind. We'll make sure to remind you guys, and you can sign up for that as the time gets closer. I want to thank all the speakers tonight that made this possible. It's much appreciated that they came in at this hour of the evening to do the presentations, to inform us and help us all gain pesticide points. Also, I have a list here that I will reveal to you of the door prize winners for this evening. So Adama provided 3 $75 gift certificates. The individuals whose names were drawn from the list of attendees tonight is William David Thompson, gets a $75 Adama gift certificate. Alice Pugsley gets a $75 Adama gift certificate. And David Atkinson also gets a $75 Adama gift certificate. Corteva supplied 2 $75 gift certificates and a $50 one. Arnold Dobson got a $75 Corteva gift certificate. Donald Brooke Fulmer got a $75 gift certificate from Corteva. And Paul Crossman got a $50 gift certificate from Corteva. Gowan supplied 2 $75 and 1 $50 gift certificate. Aubrey Pugsley got a $75 Gowan gift certificate. Brandon Erb got a $75 Gowan gift certificate. And Zachary Williams got a $50 Gowan gift certificate. NovaSource also supplied 2 $75 and a $50 gift certificate. So Ralph McCulley got a NovaSource $75 gift certificate. Matthew Kennedy got a $75 NovaSource gift certificate. And George Dorm got a $50 NovaSource gift certificate. So I certainly want to thank all those companies for their generosity in handing out gift certificates like that. So you can touch base with our office for further information on that for those who have been successful winners. Any other questions come in, Megan?
Nope, I don't see any other questions here.
Well, once again, we want to thank you all for your participation. It's been great. It's been very strong attendance the last 2 sessions. So hopefully we can continue this on for another 2 weeks. Thank everybody for your time this evening.